However, in storytelling, basically, there are patterns. For example, I can highly recommend Yair Zakovich's book, Jacob. You can find it on Amazon. Not too sure how much it costs. Maybe something like $20 something because it's a translation from the Hebrew. I just bought the book and then discovered I could have bought it secondhand for way cheaper. And I should know this stuff because I'm a bookworm. But in any case, the point to be made here is that there are patterns that you look for when you deal with storytelling. It's not, one thing and then another thing. The writers use similar motifs to create stories. Now, it does raise the whole question of, well, if there are motifs, then can we trust the stories? And the answer is most definitely yes. However, I think that it's quite reasonable to say that the Torah was written with a style that would be similar. Each story uses similar motifs for one very simple reason. It makes it easier for people to follow the story. You have to remember something, that back in the day, storytelling had to be told mostly orally. It does raise a whole bunch of different questions that have to be asked about the storyline in the Tanakh itself. However, you have to remember these stories are mostly stories that are told to inspire people. And they're told to tell you also the history of the people. So there has to be a reasonable mechanism to remember the story when you're telling it. This is why there's this understanding that the storytelling is specifically told in a pattern to make it easier for people to remember the story. So, for example, the whole idea of a barren woman and then her giving birth after time. You have the story of competition or conflict between brothers. In many cases, an issue of inheritance, which is, by the way, a very, very important story in general for the people of Israel, because one of the major arguments, and this argument exists to this very day, is what exactly is the right of the Israelites to sit in the land. Other motifs can be, for example, suffering and salvation. You have to remember the story of the Exodus is basically a story of suffering, enslavement, and salvation. So certain storylines were described in a very, very specific manner to follow suit of certain ideas. However, it doesn't mean the story is not true. You have to remember this difference. The fact that someone took poetic license in the way they told a story doesn't mean the story is not necessarily true. If it's based on facts, then whatever is the way you decide to tell the story is already your own way. You have to think about it, for example, when you're telling a story to your children about something that happened to you, you recall some of the story and you also fill in sometimes pieces of information or ideas to try to present the story in a manner that will be listenable. Because if I, for example, give you an historical account of things, you'll be sitting there scratching your head for hours, basically bored out of your skull. So you have to develop it in a way that will make it interesting for everyone. I think the Bible scholars kind of exaggerate certain things. They say, oh, look, we find this motif here and this motif there, therefore we consider everything was made up. No, it doesn't work like that. Stories, legends are usually based on something to some degree real. The question is, to what degree was the story taken out of proportion? However, it's a very common understanding that the Israelites tended not to exaggerate when they describe something, and sometimes even describe things which are uncomfortable for them. For example, the origins of King David, or the origins of the house of Peretz, or murder of the first degree in the beginning of the world. Things like that. They didn't hide these pieces of information. It wasn't part of the culture. And they didn't tend to exaggerate. Actually, the kings of Israel, for example, are described in the way we understand them to really be. Simple kings that don't really go out of their shell that much. They actually prefer to keep it quiet, keep it to themselves. They weren't trying to conquer the world. They were only trying to control areas which were strategic for them. They're not trying to exaggerate like kings of Babylon and Assyria did. They say, oh, I conquered this, I conquered that. I established judgment in the world, like Hammurabi writes. It wasn't like that. And it's quite consistent in the biblical text. So I think it's quite reasonable to some degree. Again, it requires a lot more arguments and a lot more explanations to really understand this thing to its fullest potential. But I think that there's a bias that a lot of Bible scholars go by, which is very, very unhealthy and distorts a lot of the information. Thank God my thing is working in English finally. It was been working lately in Hebrew, which kind of got my nerves. Okay, we're going to start sharing the text. So what I'm going to be comparing here today is the text of Genesis 16 and Genesis 21, just to show you some patterns that lap over one another and possibly what it might mean, what scholars might say. So this is going to be a bit more of a, I would say, scholarly class than anything else. But in any case, here we go, and I hope the text is big enough. I do apologize if it isn't. What I can do here is the following. Just a second. Okay, I think this will be big enough. Now, I was trying to color, let's make sure everyone can see it, so I'm just going to ask the question, could everyone see the text? Can everyone see the text before I start with this comparison reading? Just give it a couple of seconds just to make sure everyone can see it. Rick couldn't see it and Miriam couldn't see it. Okay, so it probably has to do with the browsers. As we've established already in the past, it could be connected to your browser, so please either refresh or switch browser to make sure that that you can actually see it. So we're going to wait a few more seconds because it's important to see this entire text. And while we're waiting, I will be doing the following. I'm going to be checking what is the deal with someone. Should be here, is not here. Let me just remind them. Did you hear about this whole thing that they think they discovered who Jack the Ripper was? Okay, no, I'm putting back up. I closed the whole thing. Okay, so testing just very quickly because it's important to see the words, to see everything. This is where I want to make sure that everyone is actually seeing the text. So testing again. Okay, Miriam says she could see. Rick, can you see it? Could you see it? Hopefully you did. Okay, very good. Everyone can see it. So first of all, what do you have in front of us? Because also we're recording this. You basically have in front of you two texts. The text on the right, hopefully it's on your right, should start with a hey, by the way, just to make sure. If you see me marking a hey, it should be on the right-hand side. Basically is the text from Genesis 16. It talks about Hagar and Sarah, or Sarai at that stage, and then the left-hand side of the text is basically Genesis 21. So we're actually going to study the continuation of Genesis 21 from a comparison to the text from Genesis 16. So we're going to start from verse 10 again. I know we finished at verse 25, but it's a little bit important. So verse 10 says, "Vatomer le'Avraham," and she said to Avraham, "Garesh ha'ama hazot ve'et bena." Basically, throw out, divorce, kick her out. But she calls her a slave girl, a slave woman, as I said last time, handmaid, and her son, not mentioning their names at all. Ki lo yirash ben ha'ama hazot im beni im Yitzchak. For this maid will not, the son of this maid will not inherit with my son, with Isaac, being very emphatic, calling her hazot, which sounds a little bit derogative, etc. Now you have to remember, if you go back to Genesis 16, she actually says to him, "Vatomer Sarai Avram," it's a very similar opening statement, "Hamasi alecha." Here she's actually saying Hamas. She's basically saying she's angry, and she argues, "Anochi natati shifchati bechekecha." She calls her a shifcha. She calls her a slave, and she says, "Vatere This is verse 5 in Genesis 16. Ki harata ve'ekal be'einea. She saw that she's become pregnant, and therefore she's looking down at me. And she says, Yishpot Adonai beni uvenecha. So let me mark this one for a second. Let's underline it for a second. Yishpot Adonai beni uvenecha. The Lord will judge between you and I. In our story, we don't have that response. Sarah is invoking that God, by the way presented as Yud Hei Vav Hei, would judge between her and Avraham. The argument is not between Sarah and Hagar. The focus is the argument between Sarah and Avram. Okay, it wasn't called Avraham yet. And she says, God will judge between you and I, invoking divine judgment. Where do we see the parallel? The parallel is in this word. Yirash. Why does she say the word Yirash? Why does she invoke the whole thing of inheritance? Last week, I mentioned the whole idea, if I remember correctly, I have to re-listen to the recording, I remember everything that I said. But last week, I pointed out to the issue of the Yerusha, the inheritance being her right, him being an endangerment, a danger to her son. If he does inherit, he thinks he's equal, he can try to take over, etc. That's one side. Every story can be interpreted in different ways. Here, you can also say she invokes the word Yirash by the fact that God promised that Isaac will be the inheritance. Isaac will be the continuation of the family. And by invoking this word, and again, this is my interpretation, but by invoking this word, what she's actually doing is still again invoking Yishpot Adonai beni uvenecha. She's invoking it, but not directly. She's already said it before. Avraham knows of that conversation. Avraham knows of her threat. She doesn't have to repeat it again. All she has to do is say, get rid of her. You remember what I said last time. And she says, she's the Amma, she's the handmaid. Her son is not in the divine promise. And by mentioning the divine or hinting the divine promise, she's invoking again, God would judge between you and I. But something else happens. We have something that does not happen previously. This is going to be marked up in colors and everything. It's going to be fun. In verse 11 it says, Vayera hadavar me'od be'einei Avraham alodot beno. Okay, remember I mentioned, this is verse 11, it was evil in his eyes, it was wicked in his eyes, it was bad in his eyes. In the eyes of Avraham, what has been said about his son. He knows what's told about his son is true. But here his emotion is different. Hagar, concubine, was aware of having a child. Here he understands that children is a very, very important thing. It's difficult for him. The child hasn't been born yet. In chapter 16. Okay? So what happens in chapter 16? It says, Vayomer Avram el Sarai. Avram said to Sarai, Hine shivchatech beyadech, asila hatov be'inaich. He says to her, your handmaid is in your hands, do with her whatever you want. There's no bond yet. The child is not born yet. He doesn't know the quality of the child yet. He doesn't know anything about this child. He says, do with her whatever you want. She tortures her and she runs away. Here he's already developed an emotional feeling to him. So we see the differences between the stories. There are differences. Here it saddens him. But we know it saddens him because the underline here is his son. It's no longer, it's some etherical baby. No, this is his son. He knows his child. He spent time with his child. And this is just making him hurt. And this is why verse 12 happens. Vayomer Elohim el Avraham Okay, verse 6 over here is Avraham talking. Verse 12 has to be God. Vayomer Elohim el Avraham, al yera be'einecha al hana'ar ve'al amatecha. God speaks directly to him. By the way, God is referred to as Elohim here. This is one of those theories that says that there are different authors and each author used a different name. And by using a different name, it obviously clearly shows that the story came from a different source. And these are basically the same story, two different variations. Yes or no? It could be that the story was told in a slightly different way, using a slightly different name. But we know the mindset of the Bible. There is no difference between Yud Hey Vav He and the name Elohim. It's the same. It's the same God. Okay. There's an interesting statement by Professor Shlomo Morag, who says that to really understand Hebrew, you really have to understand the mindset of the writers. I think the same thing goes here. I think that the commentators and the scholars go out of their way to prove things without stopping and thinking, well, in the mind of these writers, it's Yud Hey Vav Hey Elohim is the same thing. So why start separating them from one another? But why does he use Elohim and Yud Hey Vav here? I think because the people who told these stories knew that these stories were very, very similar. But they knew these stories meant two different things. These were two separate stories that happened in two separate times. And they changed the name of God, and they changed the voices of the people speaking to make sure people don't confuse the stories. Okay? It's not the way they think it was. They're going out of their way to disprove the Bible instead of stopping and thinking, well, if you're a storyteller, and this is how they insist the information was passed down, you would do a variation to make sure you don't confuse them. You create variety in the story. Any of you tried to eat the same breakfast for 20 days or 30 days in a row? I've done it. It gets boring. Okay? I've done it. We need variety as human beings. We have to have variety. It's part of our nature. But here the speaker is different. He says to him, as I said last week, Kol asher tomar elecha Sarah, shema bekola. Anything that Sarah says to you, hear in her voice. Hear to her voice. Rendering what we have here, as he says here, Asila hatov be'inaich. Here, shema bekola. It's the same idea, repeated again, just in different locations, in a different way of saying. But also make the point, Ki v'Yitzchak ikare lecha zera, because Isaac will be your seed. Okay? So we're going to now continue with the left side for now. V'gam et ben ha'ama, verse 13, Legoy asimenu ki zar'acha hu, making sure that the original promise from the past about when he told him about Yishmael, that the promise will be fulfilled. And then we have Vayashkem Avraham baboker. Avraham got out in the morning. Vikach lechem v'chemat mayim. He took bread and water. Veiten el Hagar sam al shichma. He gave it to Hagar and put it on her side. Ve'et hayered ve'shalecheh. And he put in the child and he sent them away. Vatelech vateta b'midbar Beersheva. She goes and gets lost in she just continues wandering. Remember the discussion from last week? Does teta mean to wander or to become lost? I said it usually means to become lost, and she becomes lost in the area of Beersheva. The difference is Hagar runs away in chapter 16. Here she's sent away, but she basically leaves. The main point for us, by the way, is she also basically gets lost in the desert. Now, I want to push this down a little bit because I want things parallel to one another. So, give me a second here. Let me just push this down a little bit more. Just a second. Sorry about this. Hope people are enjoying this lesson. I'll check that in a moment. Okay, so she's now in the desert, and basically a very, very similar thing happens. But there's a bit of a difference. So now we're continuing from where we stopped last week, just to check if there are any comments. No one said anything. Okay. So in verse 16, or in chapter 21, verse 15, sorry. So it says, Vayichlu hamayim. Vayichlu is with kala. Hamayim kalu, basically she's out of water. Mina chemet, from this leather thing they used to use. Usually they'll take the skin of a young animal, a goat or a sheep. They'll remove the hairs. They'll process the skin. They'll sew the skin and basically use it to retain water. Okay, they had to seal it in certain ways. There were different ways of doing it. One of the interesting ways they used to use was a certain tar they used to produce, but it wasn't a tar. It was, I can't remember what it's called now, but it had certain elements which were very, very interesting. Basically with glue and sew and everything, and it could be able to contain water in it. It says, "Vatashlech et hayeled tachat achad hasichim." She runs out of water, so she just abandons. Here the root is vatashlech, from the root shalach, which basically means to throw away. Now notice teshaleach and vayeshalechea, they're not the same word. Lishloach is to send away. As I mentioned last week, it can mean also divorce. Shalach here means to send, can either mean send away or put away. Can also mean to throw away. She just dumped him there and walked away. And she puts him underneath one of the bushes. Now this part of information doesn't exist in chapter 16 because she doesn't have the child yet. And what happens in verse 16? It says, "Vatelech v'teshev lach mineged." She sat, she walked away, and she sat mineged. Mineged basically means in parallel, in a place that she can still see him. But she's standing in a distance. Usually when people are neged in the Bible, usually means they are in a safe distance from one another, probably several hundred yards or several hundred feet from one another. And it basically says, Harchek kimatahave keshet. This is actually a term which basically means several hundred feet, or several, close to 100 feet maybe. Basically a pretty big distance away. Matahave keshet is actually an archaic term from the military service. Basically meant a distance that they would use. There are certain distances which are used. This is from the military, which was borrowed into the everyday lingo, and people basically used it to describe the fact that they're standing in basically a safe distance from the archers. Ki amra, but why does she do this? It says in continuation of the verse, Ki amra, for she said, Al er'e bemot hayaled. I do not want to see the death of the child. Now it's interesting. She says al and not lo. Al is usually used to prohibition of basically prohibiting something which is a will. Okay, so she says, so I may not see the death of the child. What is the difference between al and the word lo? Lo basically means no, in the sense of negation like al, but there's a difference in the way they're used. Lo is usually used to negate a command form. Er'e is a type of command form, but here I think that because it's a prohibition on oneself, lo just synthetically doesn't fit in the location. Just you don't use lo. Okay, she's talking to herself. Al er'e seems to be a more proper way of using it. And it says, Vateshev meneged, she sat from a distance. Vatisa et kolah vatevk. She raises her voice and she cries. Now, the fact that she cries here could also be, you can connect it, for example, to the whole issue here of Ta'anea Sarai Vativrach mipanea. Sarah told her and she ran away. Seems to be that she also cried back then. So the torture of Hagar by Sarai is now being projected into the torture, basically having to see her child suffer. Also remember, being tortured to some degree, I'm not too sure what it means to be tortured, maybe just being very harsh to one, to a person. But it seems to be that one of the fears also of a woman who's pregnant, if she's being mistreated, is that she might lose the baby. So it's also slightly connected. She might have lost the baby when she was being tortured by Sarah, and she's going to lose her son here. So it's the same suffering. But then something else happens. Verse 17 says, "Vayishma Elohim et kol hana'ar." Elohim heard the voice of the boy. Okay? It's a little different. Why? Because in chapter 16, verse 7, it says, "Vayimtze'eha malach Adonai al ein hamayim b'midbar." In chapter 21, she runs out of water. In chapter 16, she has water. Okay, he finds her next to the fountain of the water, Ein Hamayim, where the water comes out, springs out. It's not an issue of she's about to die. It's an issue that she's run away. Here, Elohim hears the voice of the boy. Okay, the time of reaction is different. Hagar is guilty of something. It seems today it's her fault that Yishmael behaves in the way he does. She was enticing him. I was the one who bore the first son. I was the one who gave the firstborn. This child is only the secondborn. Ishmael hears that. Yeah, I do what mom says. It's an upbringing. Here in chapter 16, Hagar is still righteous. She's being tortured for no real reason except for being arrogant. She's not endangering anyone. So the time of reaction is different. The source of reaction is also a little bit different, it seems to be. In chapter 17, we get insight to the fact that God hears the call of the boy and immediately sends an angel. It's immediate. With Hagar, it takes time. She has to run away. She has to get there. But when the boy cries, it's immediate. Why? Because he is the son of Abraham. Okay, there are different angles of looking at it. I don't know if you noticed I was hinting to both of them because I was slightly contradicting myself. But the point is that stories can be read in different ways. So Elohim hears his voice, and then we have Vayikra Malach Elohim El Hagar Min Hashamayim. Now here's a very, very interesting thing. In chapter 16, the angel finds her next to the fountain. Here, the angel Malach Elohim calls to Hagar from the sky. There actually is a massive difference between the two stories. Now, God willing, sometime, hopefully this week, I'll be getting a package with a book that talks about the belief of angels. It's a reprint of a book by Alexander Roffe that was printed originally in 1979. He actually went over the book again with new information. Was reprinted about a couple of years ago. It was reprinted. I found the new reprint because I didn't want to buy the old one from 1979. Bad print, blah blah blah. And there's an interesting question about the prospect of what angels are. And this is maybe one of the very few places in the Tanakh that I would say that there is a difference in the story to an extent where it presents different ways of thinking. And this is an interesting thing. In chapter 16, the angel seems to be physical, seems to be there, actually there, talking to her. Well, in chapter 21, he's talking to her from the heavens. She only hears a voice. Now, this also might be connected to something a little bit different as well. In chapter 16, she is not there's no connection to the son of Abraham. When Abraham speaks with God, he speaks directly to God, to some degree. There are some places where an angel appears in between, but that's because someone else has to be involved. So God sends an angel, sends something that looks like a person, talks with her, encourages her. In chapter 17, the son of Abraham is involved. The revelation is a lot more clear. It's clear it's an angel. In chapter 16, she doesn't know prior to the fact that he vanishes. The fact that he gives her a prophecy. She realizes who he is only at the end. Classic northern story. Classic thing where the angels are physical. Well, in chapter 21, we see a slightly different mindset. The angel of God speaks from the heavens. There's nothing physical in front of us. It's an interesting point. It's something that's been intriguing me for quite a while, but I don't have the sources yet. When I get them, I will look into it. But now I'm going to ask people for people's opinion. Now, first of all, Kimberly wrote, seems like Hagar has been through some genuinely rough things and she never handled them well. Could be. It's a possibility. It's a possibility. Any comments on the angel thing before we carry on? And also comments are like, oh, this is an awesome lesson. No, okay. Anything at all? I'm going to give it a second because this is a very intriguing subject. I would love to hear people's opinion about it. Thank you. I was kidding about that, but okay. Any thoughts whatsoever? 10 seconds. Okay, I'm not seeing any comments, so I am going to continue. Oh, wait. I've been wanting to study this. Yeah, well, when I get the book, lately I've been reading a lot, so that book is going to go straight into my reading pile when it arrives. So we might have a special session just about angels. We'll see. Okay, so I don't see any comments here about this, so let's carry on. So the angel of God calls out to Hagar from the skies and says, "Vayomer la ma lach Hagar." It says here in the continuation in verse 17, "Vayomer la ma lach Hagar." Now he's not asking her a question, he's encouraging her. Ma is usually used for questions. He's not asking a question. He says to her, it's a form of encouragement. You have no reason to worry. What is this worry that you're worrying? It's a lot of nonsense. Al tir'i. Do not be afraid. Let me scroll down a little bit. He says to Al tir'i, do not be afraid. Ki shama Elohim et kol hanar ba'asher hu sham. For God has heard the voice of the boy where he lies. Okay? It's all about the boy. He is the seed of Abraham. Hagar can turn into dust and vanish in the wind as far as the text cares. The boy is important. The boy is important to God. Because he made a promise to Abraham, and God does not reverse any of his promises. So it's a very, very important lesson here as well. Even in a situation where it's potentially a danger to his own people, if God made a promise, he does not return, he does not revert that promise. He might punish the person harming Israel, but he will not destroy if he made a promise. In chapter 16, something a little bit different happens. He says to her, go back to your master, to mistress, and he says to her, Harbe arbe et zarech ve'esafer merov. By the way, it's basically repeated as well. Ki legoy gadol asimenu. It's the same idea. Okay. Chapter 16 is the seed. Chapter 21 means a nation. Goy just means nation. Everyone is the goyim. Even the Jews are the goyim. Okay, it's a latter use of the word goy in basically in Mishnaic Hebrew, but it's a misuse. It's not what the word actually originally meant. What the word originally meant was something completely different. Okay, but he says to her, "Kumi, arise, se'i etana, carry the boy, va'haziki et yadech bo, and hold your hand to support him." She has to act. If you want anything to happen, move yourself. Stop whining about it. And this is the thing about Ishmael. He has to be an acting person. Okay? And then it says, Vayifkach Elohim et einea, God opened her eyes, Vatere be'er mayim, and she saw a water well. Now the water well is back. Now we see the water again. Okay? So the water well, okay, it's because there's a distance between them. I'm marking the color. Okay, and we have the water well here. Where is it? Ein hamayim b'midbar. Okay, so they're basically on the same place, same location. Very similar scenario. Someone's about to suffer, someone's in the desert, someone's stuck. God intervenes in one way or another, and she drinks the water here, and that's it. In chapter 16, she also, she realizes it's an angel. She calls the well by a name, Ve'er lechai ro'i. It's between Kadesh and between Bared, or Bered. Okay? She goes back, she gives birth, and everyone's happy. Okay? Here, in our chapter, she takes her son, she lets him drink, it says, Vatelech, vatemale tachemet. She's still holding onto the skin. She fills it up with water. Vatasht et hana. She lets him drink. She saves his life. There's a question here. Why would a young man be weaker than a woman who's probably much, much older? A young boy, he's not that young. If he was circumcised when he was 13, and a year later, Yitzchak is born, is already 14. Yitzchak has to be maybe 2 or 3 years old. This young man is 17, 18 years old. He should be able to survive. But there's a hint here as well. His mother is a nasty piece of work. His mother seems to be, she did not give her son the water. She's described on top saying, I don't want to see the boy die. It's like saying, my loved one is in hospital dying, I'm going to sit at home. Why is he dying? Because of her fault. She did not let him drink. She kept the water to herself, and he's a good boy. He listens to what his mother says. His mother was talking against Sarah. He went against Isaac. His mother says to him, I need the water. He just listens. He's to a certain degree a passive person. But he learns from his mother's behavior. When he finishes with his mother complex, he becomes a wild man. Why does he become a wild man? Why does he have complete disregard to anyone else besides himself? Where did he learn it from? No one else but dear old mother. And she's described here. You just have to read between the lines to see it. She's a nasty piece of work, as my dad would say in the English vernacular. She's a mean person. She's a horrible person. And she happens to be an Egyptian, one of our hated people, one of the most hated groups amongst a lot of people in the ancient Canaanite world. People despised the Egyptians. And the Egyptians despised everyone else. The Egyptians thought that they were the elite. They were the Aryans of the time. They believed that they were entitled to everything, which is expressed in Hagar's behavior. She's a nasty person. This is why we never hear of her again. And this is why the possibility of Hagar and Keturah, as it was asked last week, someone asked if Hagar and Keturah is the same person, and the answer is probably not. Hagar is a nasty person. We don't want her. Okay, basically Sarai was right to do what she did because she knew who this woman really was. But on the other hand, Ishmael, being the son of Avraham, God protects him and takes care of him. He's not judging him in what he's going to be in the future. He's judging him in the now. Vayhi Elohim et hana'ar vayigdal. God was with the boy. Okay, et hana'ar means with the na'ar. This is a case where the word et is used with the word im. By the way, an interesting thing, et meaning im is usually recognized as being a northern dialect. Use of the word et, while et just meaning the as an object marker is more the common use. Someone will make the argument that the chapter 21 is the northern version, while chapter 16 is the southern version. And This is why he also uses the name Elohim. That seems to be more of a generalized way of approaching to God. Maybe in the north he didn't like using the name Yud He Vav He. It's possible. That's what a scholar might say. And it says, Vayeshev b'midbar vayhi roveh kashat. He sat in the desert and he became an archer. Roveh means to fire to some degree, and kashat means bow. He became an archer. Now, let me actually check the word roveh in the dictionary very quickly. Roveh. Could roveh mean a great? So it might mean no, it means to fire. He basically became an archer. He who fires with an arrow, with a bow. So he became an archer. I was trying to think maybe roveh is into the word rabbah, basically mean great, so great archer, but roveh kashat means one who fires with an arch. Verse 21, Vayeshev b'midbar Paran. He sat in the desert of Paran, which is in the south. Vatikach lo imo isha. His mother took him a wife. Meretz Canaan. She took a wife from the land of Egypt. She will not settle for anything less for her son than a good Egyptian woman. Sounds a bit like a Jewish mother. She would only get him a good Jewish boy, or a good Jewish girl, depending on which gender the child is. Okay, so here she takes only an Egyptian woman. Shows how much of a snob she is. Okay, so that's basically just comparing these two stories. There are some similarities, and there are also a lot of differences between them. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment so I can switch text. Okay. Kimberly says, maybe the angel appeared physically the first time so Hagar wouldn't think she was crazy for only hearing voices. It's an interesting idea, maybe. Entitlement mentality is very interesting. I personally think it's real. Mom sat at the bow shot away and Ishmael becomes an archer. Ooh, that's an interesting point. Maybe he said, "Okay, Mom, next time you get away from me the distance of an arch of a bow, I will shoot you down." Maybe it's possible. I'm not going to say it isn't. Maybe he's hinting to something. Mom, I remember what you did, and I'm not going to forgive you for it. It's quite possible. Put it this: it seems to be that Ishmael is a very, very angry young man. He's fed up of a lot of things, and he wants what he considers to be rightfully his. Okay, we're going to switch now to the next text. I'm just going to open up last week's text so we have it in front of us, and I hope people are enjoying the lesson. Okay, this is going to be verse 29. Yeah, this is also a slightly long piece. We'll go through it. Let me share the screen with you guys. Okay, just to make sure everyone sees it, just so we don't have any problems. Okay, so now we have a story that kind of gets in between, but it's a very, very important story. By the way, next time we actually go into the story of the Akedah, which is one of my favorite stories to tell. So be prepared for next week. Okay, verse 22, chapter 21, it says, Vayhi ba'etahi, and it was at that time, maybe presumably near the time he sent away Hagar. Vayomer Avimelech ufichor sar tzevo. Avimelech, the king of Gerar, the Philistines. These are not the same Philistines as we know from the story of David. Something else happened there. Who are these Philistines is an interesting question. He says to Avraham, saying, Elohim immecha bechol asher ata oseh. He greets him, God is with you in everything that you do. It's like the greeting that says, enter now, O he who is blessed by the Lord. Basically says, no, God is with you, you're an awesome guy, we like you. And then he says to him in verse 23, Ve'ata, and now, from the word et, which means a moment. Hi shava li ve'elohim henna. Take a vow, take an oath, shvu'ah, to God. Here, now, before me. What is his request? Im tishkor li, if you lie to me, ulnini ulnechdi, to me, my great-grandson and my grandson. Where's his son in this question, in this form? This is what's referred to as an archaic or frozen form. The idea of mentioning great-grandson and grandson without mentioning a son is apparently something, a formula they used to use in the ancient world, basically meant a very, very long time. They also know that Abraham is a chosen one of God. He might live a very long time, and kings tend to not have a very long lifespan. So basically he's saying, don't try to do something if you lie to me or any one of my descendants. He says, why? Here's the reason why. Kachesed asher asiti immecha ta'asei imadi. As the chesed usually is a righteous deed, but it's not tzedakah in the same sense. Chesed is an act of goodwill. We've done something with you that we didn't have to do, but we did it anyhow. And I have done with you, and you will do it with me, and with the land, ve'im haaretz asher garta ba, with the land which you have lived with. He mentions you're living here as a ger. You're not part of us. You're not one of us. Okay, garta ba. You're a sojourner. You don't really belong here. We're allowing you to live here. So Avraham, being the diplomat, says, Vayomer Avraham. Avraham said, Anochi eshaveh. He accepts it. But now he pulls a fast one on Avimelech. Okay, where's the fast one? He says, verse 25, Vehochiach. Okay, Avraham chastised Avimelech al odot be'er hamayim asher gazlu avdei Avimelech. Okay, remember Lot and the water? Same thing here. Water is very, very important, especially in this culture. By the way, this you should know some insight about Israel. We have very strict rules about water here in Israel. You're not supposed to wash your car with a hose. You're only allowed to water your yard at very specific hours of the day. If you have a yard and you water your plants, you are charged a very specific fee of money for this. You get charged through the nose for the money, basically. Why? Because this region has never had a lot of water. And if we use the water to water anything, it has to be agricultural. This is why I get very upset with people. I walk by in town, for example, and this used to be like half a village. It was established in 1927. It was a bit like a village. And a lot of people have private properties that they bought back in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. And they build their own private houses. And I walk by these private houses, and they have yards. Some of these people sit on, something pretty big. They put grass down. You can have plants growing. You can feed your family with these things. I almost said to someone, you know what? Give me this plot. I will take care of it on a daily basis. I will find the plants that can grow here the best, and I'll feed my family off of this. I'll pay you rent for using your land. People don't really understand how to use land properly these days. But water is a very scarce item in this region. This is why it's very important, the war over water in this story here, because it's a very, very problematic subject. So he tells him, and he knows who Avraham is. He knows Avraham has a lot of influence. Avraham is not afraid to use his influence. And he says, Avraham says, Avimelech says, Avimelech, Lo yadati. I didn't know. Not me. Wasn't me. Don't try to blame me here. Basically playing, as my dad would say, silly buggers. Basically playing games. Lo yadati mi asai tadavar hazeh. I don't know who did this, but these are Avimelech's servants. Avraham is basically saying, I don't mind doing what you just described, but if you're doing a chesed with me, I have to tell you a couple of things about this chesed that you've been doing with me. But what does Avimelech do? He's being, playing around. He says, I don't know who did it. You didn't tell me. You should have told me about this. We're friends. V'gam anochi lo shamati bilti hayom. And I didn't hear it until today. Bilti is a type of negation from the word bal, which means not. I have not heard of this until today. Basically, is what we saw, humitamim. He's being righteous. He's saying, I didn't know. So what does Avraham do? He doesn't allow him just to take an oath. He's not making this one-sided. Avimelech turns around and says, take an oath to me. Avraham says, your servant stole my water. Avimelech says, I didn't know about this, you never told me. Avraham in his mind goes, yeah, right. So what does Avraham do? He does something completely different. He binds both of them. By what? By creating a covenant. He's not taking an oath, which is one-sided. He's forcing Avimelech to create a covenant with him. And it's not just a promise. They actually do it over animals. And the blood of these animals actually might have been also spilled, or there might have been blood here as well. So verse 27, Veikach Avraham tzon uvakar. Avraham took tzon uvakar, which basically means flock. Vaiten la'Avimelech. He gives it to Avimelech. And that's, by the way, one of the ways of doing a covenant. You exchange things. So here he's giving him animals. It doesn't mention what Avimelech gives in exchange, but it might be that Avimelech made a promise that the wells will be given back to him. So they're doing an exchange here. By giving these animals to him, he says, Vaychretu shenehem berit. They both cut a covenant. Now, why is it karat brit? For those who don't remember, the concept of kritat brit has to do with cutting oneself. They used to cut their hands or mix blood in some way or another. At one point they stopped doing it. Some people use spit at one point, or salt, etc. But basically it's something that symbolizes a certain level of life or something very personal, and that's how they cut a covenant. It made them connected to one another. But then something unusual happens. It says, Vayitzev Avraham et sheva kivsot hatzon levadehen. By giving these animals, he does something interesting. So they bring the stock together, the livestock together. For some reason, the sheep are standing there by themselves. Why sheep? And why is he putting them by themselves? What is the real reason he's doing this? Sheep, unlike goats, represent the simple creatures, the ones that don't really have sin, the ones who are clean of any bad deeds. And he takes these sheep and he puts them aside, 7 of them, a very symbolic number. It's a number with a mystical meaning. And he puts them aside. He's playing I would say, a very dirty trick here in Avimelech. And he puts them aside. And Avimelech immediately says, Ve'emar Avimelech el Avraham, verse 29, Mahena, what are these before us? Sheva kevasota ele asher itzavta levadana. What are these 7 sheep that you put aside by themselves? There's this. I once read this comment by a scholar who said that some of our ancestors were a little cheeky sometimes. This is one of them. He's hinting, oh, you did not know about these 7. Oh, well, not the end of the world. It's okay, don't worry about it. Avraham can go through his beard while saying this. Oh, so you're like these 7 righteous creatures who have no sin whatsoever. Okay. But it's not true. You are far away from these creatures. This is why they're put aside, distanced from the rest of the animals. You're not really like that. And I know it. But why also 7? Could be 7 with the number of wells which were stolen as well. Being very, very cheeky here, telling him, I know everything, you can't lie to me. But because of diplomacy, he's being very careful how he does it. Could be. Again, this is me reading into the text. So it says in verse 30, Vayomer ki et sheva kevasot tikach miyadi. Says these 7 sheep you will take from my hand. Now, remember, earlier it says he took from the livestock and from the flock and from the cattle, and he gave it to him. Now we're returning to tell the story again, but he already gave him to him. So it's possible one or two things happened here. the writer is returning to what happened earlier, or the writer is telling us a completely separate part of what was happening. And what we had earlier is one action, this is a second action. What we had earlier was a generalized description, and here it's a specific description. But he says, "Ba'avur tiyeli le'edah," for these will be a testimony for me. Ki chafarti et ha'be'er hazot, for I have dug this well. You stole 7. You claim you know nothing about these places that were stolen. You're claiming that you're like these sheep. In retaliation, I'm telling you, I know. These 7 were stolen. Don't make this the 8th. I know. And you know, we both know I can retaliate. I have an army. And we're considered to be extremely dangerous. Everyone knows that. He's being diplomatic, but he's also putting his foot down here. And he says, for it will be a testimony, I dug this well. If he's being so peaceful and so nicey and willing to do whatever Avimelech says, why does he make this statement? I think it's very, very clear. He's making this statement for one very simple reason. I know, don't mess with me anymore. I'm fed up of your games. So verse 31 says, Al ken kara lamakom hahu be'er shava. Therefore the place is called the Well of 7. Okay, this is what's referred to as etymological legend, where this is, first of all, this is an intervention of the writer. The writer is inserting information, telling us, the etymology of the name of the place has to do with the fact that they actually they called it Beersheba because of the fact that there were 7 sheep. But here it says Kisham nishbe'u shenehem. So it's really working on a pun here. He says it's called Beersheba because they both take an oath. Shava, nishba is the same thing, but also has to do with the 7 creatures. Also, it's possible the reason he chose 7 has to do that 7 and the word shvu'ah come from the similar root. We're almost done with this section, and then I'll open up and see if anyone else has any questions or made any comments. Verse 32, Vayichretu vrit, and they cut a covenant, Bive'er Shava, they cut a covenant in Be'er Shava. Vayakom Avimelech arose, Ufichol sar tzevah, Fichol is basically his general, Vayashuv el Eretz Plishtim, they returned to the land of Philistines. In other words, not only they basically came all the way to Avraham. This shows how important Avraham was. No king in his right mind will tell a merchant, by the way, I'm coming over to speak with you. If the king wants him, he sends a messenger saying, come over. He goes by himself. He's being very, very careful. He understands that he's in hot water. He might actually approach Avraham because he knew what happened. And he might have also known that Avraham is going to retaliate. So he was trying to do something before Avraham does something. It's also a possibility. Anyone's guess. But then Avraham does something completely different. Verse 33 says, Vayita eshel bive'al shava. He basically plants a tree called an eshel. And if you give me a second here, I will try to figure out what this eshel actually is in English. 1 second here, please. No, this is not telling me what eshel is. Let's try to see what the good dictionary says about the word eshel. Brother, what does the English say? Tamarix. Yeah, it's a very, very strong tree. Yep. It's a very, very strong tree. It's a tree that would last. By the way, there's a tree to this very day that people think is the eshel of Avraham. It's a very, very old tree in the area of Beersheba. But what does he do? Vaikra sham b'shem Adonai el olam. He calls out in the name of the Lord, God of the world. Very interesting why he does this. We'll get to that in a second. It says verse 34, Vayago Avraham be'eretz Pelishtim yamim rabim. Avraham lives in the land of the Philistines many days, many years. But here's the question that we have. What on earth is this thing with tamarisk. Okay, it's the same thing. What on earth is this thing that we have? Covering his tracks. Yeah. What is this thing with planting a tree? It's just, the whole thing is just weird. Planting a tree is, first of all, he's not erecting a monument, so it's interesting thing. Also, trees are more common in the stories of Abraham. There's Alone Mamre, Elon More. Now we have Eshel in Be'er Sheva. There's this whole thing of trees. These are Abraham's markings. He marks with trees. So it's one of the things that we see here. But what exactly is the whole idea? It seems to be it's like the whole thing of altars that we find with Jacob. Jacob builds altars, Abraham builds altars, and they all leave different markers. Yaakov erects a monument in Shechem, in Bethel. He erects a lot of stones. Isaac is less active. Abraham puts up trees and altars. Yaakov puts up stone monuments and altars as well. It's basically their way to make a mark. Yaakov understands that his time in the land is questionable. He actually lived outside of the land longer than he actually lived in the land. He was born, he had to leave, he lived for 21 years in Padan Aram. He comes back, he lives here for a while, he moves down to Egypt, he's buried in Egypt, he's then taken back. He understands that his mark has to be much heavier than a tree. It has to be something from the land itself. Avraham understands his promise from God, and therefore he needs to, all he needs to do is put a tree, which also represents the whole issue of growing and fulfilling and filling the land. While Yaakov is more struggling and trying to put his footing on the ground, so he's making things out of stone. And that's probably why they're both described in different realities, because they're doing different things, because they did live in different realities. But the whole idea is making a sign. Oh, that's the tree of Avraham. Oh, that's the monument of Jacob.